Hello, everybody. This is founder Laerun, and I am here with Lady Shel. And I'm hoping that you guys will be able to learn how to connect to the online portion of Fantasy Grounds Unity. So we're going to basically go into connecting as a player, which we've already kind of covered before, but this I have a history of it now. This episode is episode number 3. And we're going to be talking about character selection and setting up your table for the best use in a game, all from the player's view. And I want to also say hello to my hostess, Lady Shel. Hey, Lady Shel, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I just wanted to thank you for joining, and it's nice to have you back. And we are going to get into this. So Lady Shel has already set up a session, so she is actually the host. In this instance that I'm viewing now, this is the player's side. The last episode we already covered, how to connect to a table, and now we've already assumed that I've already been connected to the table. And if you look up on top, you'll see that I have a history now. So this is left over from the last time that I connected to Lady Shel's table as a player. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And then it's also password protected. So I've already had that information before, so it doesn't ask for that. And that's the reason for the history, is so that the password and everything's stored. Sometimes, though, you might have to delete the history and reconnect because something may have changed, or maybe an update changed something. Whatever it might be, you might have to reconnect manually instead of using the history. So right now it's acquiring the file list. So if anything's been added or changed, or if Lady Shel shared new images, or the cache needs to be updated, that's what it's doing now. Okay, so here we are. So right now I have this pop-up page, campaign setup. So if you are new to Fantasy Grounds, this is a fairly common thing, but to a lot of us that have been around a while, this campaign setup window is actually pretty new. This is a shortcut, so if I went to next, I can actually load modules from the library here, and then I could actually pick which modules I want. So if I click on modules, I'm going to load the SRD, or if your DM wants you to, you can load the player's handbook, or I can load this other module. It all depends on what you're going to use. Lady Shel, how do you load or make these available to me on your side of the table as a game master?
Okay, on my side, I will.
Okay, so she will take her copy of Fantasy Grounds on the host side, and she's going to turn this little share button in the DM side that will share it with us. And until she does that, I cannot activate the books in the library. And that's the only point I really wanted to make. I didn't want to go too deep into that because that's more of a game master thing. Okay, so once I have the book loaded, in this case just the SRD, but if I wanted to, I can load the player's handbook or whatever it is that's shared here, depending on what you need for your session. So I'm not going to build any characters right now. So I don't really need the player's handbook. So I'm just going to leave that where it is and close that. And that enables the library. The other way to do this is to go to the library banner on the bottom right. And then you go to the library, and on the bottom left, there's a modules button. And that will bring you back to the same place. So there's two different ways to get here. The main thing is that you have at least the SRD loaded. That way, if you need to look stuff up, or if when you pick your character, it'll parse the information that comes from your sheet. So I have 4 characters to pick from. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this Dwarven Cleric. And once I've done so, it adds me as a player on the top left, and I have my character sheet. So the first thing I would do is kind of look it over. And on the right-hand side, you have all these tabs. So I'd probably preview some of this stuff as I'm waiting for the game to start. Even if I already know what's going on, I kind of want to look and see what's happening on my character sheet. And the main place that I would place this character depends on how I have the table set up. So what I'm going to do is unlock the position of some of these windows that are available to me and rearrange the desktop so it's a lot more conducive to playing. This would carry on to most other rule sets. So if you play Call of Cthulhu or Savage Worlds or even Starfighter, a lot of this stuff will apply. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock the chat window. If you notice, it's really tall and narrow. I don't really need it that tall. So I am going to right click on it and unlock it. So as a player, I can manipulate the windows within Fantasy Ground to suit my desktop. So here I have it shrunk a little bit and widened. And I do that so that I have more room for the combat tracker, which I'll get to shortly. The next thing is I'm going to unlock and move the dice tower. And I went ahead and moved it to where it's close to the dice. And in Unity, you do not have the ability to rearrange the dice like you did in Classic. So I'm going to go ahead and move the dice tower here and lock it. And I don't know if they're going to bring back that possibility or not. The other thing is, now that I have that here for the dice tower, I can drag and drop the dice in the tower, and it's much easier to see it and find it. And if you notice, it's a hidden roll. It tells me I rolled a 20 dice in the dice tower, but it doesn't give me the result. That's on the Game Master side. And that's a setting in the settings area and this is a Game Master option. So the player doesn't have any say on that. Okay, the next thing is the combat tracker. As I pull this up, it looks like the Game Master, Lady Shel, has already put all the players on there. And that's important. If you don't see your character up here, let your Game Master know. And then I'm going to take my character sheet and drag it all the way to the top of the interface and drag this corner on the very bottom right corner and drag it down to where it touches the shortcuts. So this is generally how I have my screen set up. And if Lady Shel wouldn't mind popping up a map just so I can kind of show how the rest of the screen would be optimized. I don't need it this second, but okay, there we go, perfect. So as a player, once this is shared with you, don't worry too much about what you're seeing on the map just right away. You want to worry about the frame. So this is the frame of the image on the outside here. So I'm just going to stretch this and it'll fit right where I would like it to be. So this will be my viewing area for my map. Depending on the resolution of your screen, it will depend on how well this can work for you. If you have a tiny laptop screen, you might have to play around with it, but this is basically an optimal setup. So the next thing I want to do is zoom in. So you can click anywhere on the map and mouse wheel forward to zoom in. But as you can see, it's kind of off-centered. So if you want to recenter it, you just right-click on the map, click View, and then there's a button called Zoom to Fit. And that will actually expand the map out to where you can actually see what's happening. And then the next thing is I'm going to make sure that I can actually connect to my character on the map. So as you can see, I can move. I don't need approval because that has not been enabled yet. So if you're playing on Unity, until they re-enable that option, you can move pretty much anywhere you want as a player, but try to do so within reason. So I can move 25 feet. So if I move 25 feet, that's 5 squares. Another thing I have to keep in mind is, as a player, is if I try to move over these rocks, it's going to be difficult terrain. So if I start here and I try to get to the other side, I'm going to lose at least 10 feet. So I think I could probably make it, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. At the best, I can probably reach down here. I lost 5 feet of movement because I had to climb up, go a little bit slower over the rocks, and then slide down the other side. So this is something that, as a player, you want to remember, is terrain has a lot to do with your movement. The other thing is, if there was another character here, you cannot land on their square or a monster, unless you're doing some kind of special attack or something. So that's that. I just wanted to show you that, and once the map gets moved around, what happens is people will tend to move this, and they'll resize the frame on accident. Try to keep the frame relative to the area that you have. So always make sure that the map is spread to the area you want to view it in. So think of this your TV screen, and then the content on the TV screen, you can zoom in and out. You can hold your entire, if you want to move everything, if you hold the middle mouse wheel and you click on the map, you can move the map a little bit. Or if you need to move the whole frame, you hold the right control key and click, and what it'll do is it'll help you move the frame. It just depends on where you touch. That's the main thing. But to zoom in, now I'm off-centered. So if that happens to you, you can right-click on the map anywhere, click View, and Zoom to Fit, and then zoom in and out as needed. So this is very important. A lot of people get frustrated with that. So try not to touch the frame and worry more about the content in the center after you get the frame set up. So as a player, that's generally where people get frustrated, is they that map will move on them. If you have it set to an area where it's not in the way and you don't need this area, there's no reason why you need to move it. So then I'm going to go ahead and again hit view and zoom to fit. It'll go right to snap to the outer periphery of the frame. Now we're going to move on to the character sheet.
Yeah, I put some line of sight on there just to demonstrate and see. And
nice. Oh, I can see line of sight now. That's nice. All right, cool. So that just shows there's shadow behind the light source. But it doesn't take into account the sunrise and all sunset and all that, but it's still pretty cool. All right, so on the character sheet itself, the first thing I normally do as a player, and this is a suggestion, you don't have to, but if you want to make play easier for yourself and your game master, start using the shortcuts on the very bottom. So these are hotkeys or shortcuts or quick slots or whatever you want to call them. They are available for you to use throughout gameplay. There are different combinations of them. Like right now, when I hit Alt, that brings me to the third set. So you can hit Alt, Shift, Control, Alt. I mean, there's like 96 of them. For this session, I'm only going to use the first couple. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drag my initiative. So now my initiative roll is right underneath my character sheet. Before, I'd just double click on the initiative to roll. And that worked fine, and it records the initiative. It automatically calculates my dex bonus. So I got a pretty good roll there. Now I'm going to roll from the actual hotkeys. And you only have to click it once. So that's still a pretty good roll. I got a 17 total. So that is basically one thing to help speed things up. So normally you're all the way over here on your actions tab. What you want to do is make sure that you have things shortcutted so you don't have to always come back here. Another thing that's wise that may help you is your class and character. If you click on the magnifying glass, there's this little shortcut over to the right. This is also where you would level up, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But if you want to read about your class, you can actually open this up. And what this is telling me is that I need the player's handbook, but I'm not going to worry about it. But what's going to happen is you can drag the shortcut down to your hotkeys. And if you need to look something up and you have the correct books open, you will be able to read about your class, and there's tables on there about your spells and those sort of things. That's very handy when it's time to level up or build your character. The next thing I'm going to shortcut is potentially, like a lot of times you'll forget your movement rate. If you want to, you can actually shortcut that to remind you what it is. It doesn't do anything to your character mechanically, but it helps remind you of how many squares or how many feet you can move per turn. That should be about all I really need for shortcuts on this front page. I do want to make sure that when it's time for my turn, that I pass the turn by clicking on turn complete. So if Lady Shel, if you would set that up to where I'm actually the first one on your side on the combat tracker, and then I will go ahead and pass my turn. So right now it is selected on me. The Game Master has control of this. When my turn is over, I click this down button, turn complete, and it goes to the next player. Now I can't do anything else because these players do not belong to me. However, if I wanted to claim the character and use two characters, I could. If your DM allows for it, I could pick this halfling. The only thing now is that I have to click on his portrait or in the combat tracker to access him. So that is something that, and then you double click on the portrait to bring up the sheet. And then I would layer this character on top of the other one. So when it came to his turn, all I have to do is double click on his token and it brings the sheet up. If I wanted to go back to the dwarf for some reason, I could, once it's her turn, I could go back to her too. So it just depends on whose turn it is and such. So I'm going to pass the turn for the half. So now it's her turn. I just double click on her portrait, it brings up the sheet. So that's important to know that. So you got to make sure you're on the correct character when you're making your actions if you're going to be using multiple characters. We're not going to get too far into this, but I just wanted you to know it is possible, and you need to learn how to toggle between each character. So right now I have the halfling selected, so I'm going to hit the down arrow, and now it's his turn. So that is basically where I'm at on characters for setting up shortcuts. Another thing you can do is on your character or a character, you can drag turn complete, and it will put the little shortcut in your hotkeys. So now that I'm done with my turn, that shortcut it'll actually end the turn. So those are the main shortcuts that I use for this front sheet. And now if I wanted to shortcut like a strength check or a save, I could do that at this time. Normally I don't do that, but you could. On your skills tab, another thing you might want to consider is, what's your top 2 or 3 skills? Well, in this case, she's a dwarven cleric, so I'm going to make sure I always have perception. So even if I'm not skilled in that or trained, I'm going to drag and drop this. So my perception is now shortcutted, because before, when I roll, you can double click on here and that just rolls in the open, or I can drag it down to the dice tower if that's what the game master wants. In this case, I won't know the result. Or I can take this particular roll and shortcut it like I did, and you just have to single click from the hotkeys. Okay, that one's in the open, and if I want to do it in the dice tower, I can just drag it from there. So that's how you basically set up your shortcut. So I have skills, my perception skill, and I'm going to do medicine as well. I mean, I could put more, but this is just to give you an idea of the types of things that you might want to put for certain classes. So I usually put perception and 1 or 2 of your class abilities, and that generally takes care of it. If you're a rogue, you'd obviously want stealth. Maybe everyone wants stealth, I don't know, but it's one of those things where you have to play for a while to understand what ones you end up using the most. So inventory, I'm not going to go over that. I'm not going to go over the notes. Here's the log sheet and the actions tab. So as a player, down below you have these different modes. So you have your standard and group. This is the mode you want to be in when you're building your character. Preparation allows me to prep for spells that I'm going to cast for the day. So as a cleric, I'm just going to select all of these, even though I cannot necessarily cast them all. I have these ready to go and prepared, and the slots will determine, how many I can cast per day. So I just went ahead and made those available for me, and I have them prepped, basically. If I had any other abilities, like, for instance, turn undead, I can only do that once per day, and my preserve life is part of that, so once per day. The domain spells are always prepared, so I would change these all to once daily. Or, no, actually, I'd leave them alone, because these are actually almost treated like a cantrip almost. So those I don't have to prepare. Those are always prepared regardless. So down here on this list, if Healing Word was in this group, I would not enable this because it's already part of my domain spells. Nonetheless, I'm going to go to combat mode, and then I want to change the display to actions. And this is basically the mode that you want to be in right before you play. I do not recommend shortcutting spells, attacks, or weapon attacks. The reason for it is if I do like this crossbow and I put this down in the hotkeys, if I do that and I click on it, sometimes it won't track the bonuses correctly, and sometimes it won't check off the ammo correctly. So it may not link properly to the weapon or to any of the special bonuses or attacks. So be careful about shortcutting weapons. In this case, it looked like it did work, but there are cases where it may not work properly. And I'm going to actually delete that. So to delete one of the slots, you just right click on it, click on the skull and crossbones or whatever symbol it is for your theme, and that will clear the slot. So I'm going to go through my spells. Now, if there's any spells in here that you are very unsure of, or you always forget how it works, what I would do is open up the spell description, and if this is a spell that you constantly struggle with, put it in the hotkeys. And before your turn comes up, go ahead and pop that up and read it again before you start. This will give you a little bit of advantage in having it closer to you, and between turns it's right there. Because what will happen is sometimes you'll get confused at all the different spells. So it's better to have the ones that you have trouble with on the actual hotkeys. So, Lady Shel, do you have anything to add or comment on?
I stuck a bear on the map.
Uh-oh. Oh, boy. Okay, so when we actually get further into the series, I will be talking to Lady Shel about attacking or combat with this bear. But until we get on to the next series. That'll be our next topic is fighting and all that kind of stuff. So right now, I guess my enemy is a brown bear. So that's fighting a grizzly bear, which is not an easy task. So on our next series episode, I guess that's what we'll be focusing in on, is that bear and what I'm going to do about it. And I have my halfling too. So anyhow, I have all the spells that I want to use in the game ready to go. I have these little stars next to it. I have my channel divinity set up, and anytime I use my domain spells, if they're not cantrips, I need to make sure that I still check them off as usages. Now, your spells will stay open until you use all of your slots. So in other words, throughout gameplay, when I check off these spells, it's a manual process. It doesn't do it automatically. But if I use all the first level spells and the second level spells, the slots, all the spells but the cantrips and the domain spells, they disappear. So the only way to get those back is to rest. So
actually, you couldn't do your domain spell because your domain spell will be uses the slot too.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I'm just letting you know that those regular first and second level spells, they have technically disappeared off the sheet. The only way those will come back is if the spell slots start coming back. So Lady Shel, if you'll give us a long rest, it should restore. So what she's doing on the back end is when she gives us a rest, it restores the character's spell list, and the usages are gone now. I mean, I could manually uncheck them. The only time I would really do that is if I had like the wizard arcane recovery. Then I'd go ahead and uncheck one of my spells or whatever it says to do. But generally, the short rest and the long rest will take care of restoring your usages. Now, for one-time things like your arrows, bows, or any of your equipment, that stuff you have to do manually. But as far as replacing goes, when you use your crossbow, it actually replenishes if you uncheck. So that is basically all I really wanted to cover in this particular session. We already covered those two types of connections in the last episode. I also showed you that you could use more than one character if you can toggle back and forth between the sheets. During your gameplay, if you don't like the portrait that's given to you, you talk to your game master about it, and I can double click where it says portrait, and I'm going to go into the data folder. And there's one here that I'm going to pick from the Smiteworks. And this is the new portrait that I'm going to pick. But if you have them stored on your computer, you can choose them if they're in the folder. But if not, just get with your game master, send them the little photo, or you can probably select it from your own if you have a collection. So now I've changed this portrait. So it's changed on the combat tracker and it's changed on the map. So that's nice and handy. I don't know if it did that in Classic. I thought you had to manually fix or change that. But nonetheless, all of the portrait pictures are now select. Now, if I want a token, I really don't have any tokens that I can use. It's not something I can do myself. But if you talk to your game master, they can supply you with a token. You just pick one out manually and then they'll actually add it to your sheet. That is a function that was implemented in Classic to keep memory down. So what will happen is Game Master has 50,000 tokens like I do. Those tokens will load in memory even if you're not using them. So that's how that works. Characters cannot change the token at this point unless you have an extension. Okay, I think we're going to call this a wrap.